Welcome to Great Leaders Serve. I'm your host, Kevin Best, and today we have Keith Rothfus. Thanks, Keith, for joining us today. Tell me what you're doing these days.
Hey, it's great to be with you, and thanks for having me on. And pardon the hoodie. I guess that's kind of a signature for some, or one politician in particular today, but I've been running around all morning and did not get a chance to put on a suit for this interview here. Right now, I'm doing a number of things. I'm on the board of a local bank. That keeps me busy. We meet monthly on board matters. I also participate on the senior loan committee for the bank, where we get to review loan applications every year, the audit committee, where we're making sure that things are being done the right way. I work with a nonprofit, a Catholic nonprofit in town called Dry Bones Ministries. We run a camp for kids in the summertime, a 120-acre camp up in Lawrence County, Pennsylvania. Beautiful spot. We had a couple of hundred kids up there this summer. We also do retreats for adults up there, and we do other mission activities through that ministry. I continue to dabble with some of the political work. I help a lot of candidates with respect to referring them to donors and finding pots of money for them. I'm a big fan of Governor DeSantis in Florida. He's a friend of mine from my days in Congress, and spent some time in Iowa with him earlier this year, trying to help him out. Do some writing. Once in a while, I'll have an op-ed published. And so just staying busy, staying active with my family. I got my wife. I've got 6 kids, 2 grandkids. So always something going on.
Well, congratulations on that. And I by the way, the hoodie, I think it looks really great. You know, the kids these days like the hoodie, so I think you're good with that.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about your pastoral. You brought up the politics a little bit. That's going to be something that we're going to want to talk about. So can you give a little history on that before I get into your role as a serving leader with that?
Yeah, so I served in Congress for 6 years, from 2012 through 2018, technically 2013 to 2019, because the terms begin and end in January. I ran for office first in 2010, had a narrow loss, came back in 2012 and got elected, represented a part of the suburban Pittsburgh area and up into the Laurel Highlands. My district went from the Ohio line through what's known as Beaver County, the northern suburbs of Pittsburgh, into Westmoreland County and up into Johnstown. It was a great district, met a lot of people, about 700,000 people in total. Very diverse district from an economic perspective and industry perspective. But it was a real privilege to have that opportunity to serve in the United States House. The constituent work was always, you talk about servant leader, getting stuff done for constituents, even if it's not some big piece of legislation. I had some legislative successes, but when you're closing and helping constituents who are having issues with the Veterans Administration or Social Security Office, Medicare issues, it's really meaningful when you can really help them out just on a very practical level. I actually discerned a call to run for this office back around 2008, when I participated with the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation in a leaders collaborative, where you work through over a period of about 6 months with a number of other professionals, some of the contemporary leadership training materials that are out there that you see on the New York Times bestseller list in the business section, whether it's Strength Finders or things like that. And then you take a hard look at your calling, your gifts, how are you wired? There aren't mistakes with respect to your gifts. They're there for a reason, and you should try to use them in a way that's constructive. You go through 6 months of working with these other professionals and doing some discerning. I really didn't necessarily think I was going to run for office. I knew I was going to be involved in some public policy endeavor. And just one thing led to another, and it just felt very natural deciding to run for office in 2010. Again, came up a little bit short on that, but knew that I was where I was supposed to be in that endeavor. And then running again in 2 years after that and being successful in 2012.
Well, congratulations on being able to serve the United States. That's quite a calling. Talk to me about the management system of serving leadership. Usually we are talking to business owners, and they talk about how they're able to help their employees gravitate towards that serving leader model. You're actually working on the population of that part of Pennsylvania as well as the rest of the United States. How does the serving leader model work that way?
Yeah, it's great question. I used to talk that I had 700,000 bosses because really in our country, it's the constituents who are paying your salary, and you really need to go into it with that mindset. You're there for a season. you have no idea that people could bounce you after 2 years. I was in there for 3 terms, 6 years, lost the race in 2018 after our Pennsylvania Supreme Court due to redistricting on its own without any help from the legislature, which is an issue for another day. But I was there for 6 years, and every day I thought, look, I'm there for the constituents. They elected me. Even those who did not agree with me philosophically, if they had an issue with, for example, Social Security, veterans issues, my office was there to serve. We served people like that. And it was always gratifying to achieve a result. Even if somebody wasn't going to support me in an election, they'd thank me for the work that I was doing. It's okay for people to disagree on policy issues. In this country right now, we live in a time, and let's hope, we talked before going on about, will people listen to the podcast in 10 years? And let's hope some of these issues get worked out after 10 years. But we live in an era now of demonization in politics, where we don't just disagree with people, we demonize people, and that is just wrong. It's okay to have disagreements. We've always had disagreements, but we get into this culture of canceling one another. It's almost like excommunicating somebody from a group. Yet in this context, there doesn't seem to be forgiveness or reconciliation, and so we've got to continually look for areas where we can be agreeing, have honest disagreements. And look, that's what elections are about. If you fundamentally disagree with somebody on a particular issue, you get to exercise that decision at the ballot box.
How do you feel that your serving leader mindset helps you with those issues? And then how does it help when you're talking to others, when you're talking to the other Congress people, or you're talking to your own constituents?
Well, it does keep you grounded. I feel like I have to justify every vote that I take. Some of these votes are very difficult, and very often you have people disagree with you. One of the problems we have in the modern Congress is when they package these massive bills together that go for a couple thousand pages and spend $1 trillion. You might agree with 60% of it and disagree with 40% of it, and you really don't get a say on the 40%. And so you can vote yes or vote no, and then you can explain it to your constituents. The problem is if you have 100 good reasons to vote for a bill and 100 bad reasons to vote against the bill, there's a problem with the process. Mm-hmm. And so I've written about this. I had a article published in the National Affairs Journal. People can look it up back around 2000, 2001, where I suggested a number of reforms that people should be taking in Congress to make the place work better.
All right. And let's go to today. The volunteering that you do, along with the board work that you do, how does the serving leader mindset work in the bank area? Let's go with that one specifically.
Well, I happen to work for a very interesting bank. It's called Enterprise Bank. It's based in Hampton Township. It's exclusively commercial. We deal with mainly small businesses. There's not a consumer side to the business, but it really does specialize with working with small business and giving the small businesses the guidance that they need to be successful. And it's been a bank that's been around since the late 1990s, a group of people who formed the bank with intentionality about helping businesses get through rough times. And it's been a very successful model. And we have these events where we have customers and clients come in and talk to us, and I hear stories. I've only been on the board for 4 or 5 years, but you hear the stories going back 10, 15 years of how this bank has been there and helped these businesses get through some tough times.
So so obviously when you were approached by them, did you know about the bank ahead of time, and did you know that this mentality was there, or did you find that out after you got into the bank?
Yeah, I used to have the bank CEO was one of my, I was on the Financial Services Committee while I was in the House, and I'm always looking for feedback from constituents. And this particular bank was always more than willing to give feedback because they understood the issues with some of the regulators that most banks don't really deal with. A lot of the time with banking, particularly with the bigger banks, it becomes a volume business, and You have a huge legal department, you have a huge compliance department, and these smaller community banks have been really having a difficult time over the years with the regulatory environment. We're losing more and more of these small community banks. They have to merge or they have to get bought by a bigger bank just because the cost of compliance are so high. So, they gave me a really good insight as a legislator over this area and what might work, what might not work, the pressures coming out of Washington, D.C., and looking for practical, common sense regulation and not regulation for regulation's sake.
So as a serving leader mindset that you have, you already brought up like a financial challenge that the bank has to deal with is the cost of compliance, along with taking care of their own clients there. So when you're looking at that, or even when you talked about in politics and the bills, there's a financial cost there. But when you're looking at serving leadership, how do you feel that, let's go to the bank, how do you feel that the bank is able to help their clients with that serving leader mentality? How are they helping you with that enormous cost of compliance?
Well, it's one to one to one to one. You're talking directly with the clients. You're understanding what their pressure points are, what their needs are. We have a number of officers at the bank, loan officers, relationship managers who are able to work directly with the clients, and they have good experience over the years of working with other clients, similarly situated clients, understanding balance sheets, seeing where there might be issues, seeing where there might be opportunities for a business to get through a pressing time. And the clients appreciate that kind of feedback.
So if we were able to, now let's go back to Congress for a second here and ask a similar question is, we have now these enormous bills, right? You talk these omnibus bills that are billions to trillions of dollars. And we're looking at this from the serving leader mentality. What is the purpose? What is the greater purpose of these? What are the obstacles that we're helping people overcome? Are we giving a hand up? How are we dealing with the issues from that serving leader mentality? How do you deal with that when you're talking about, as you said, I might agree with 60% of the bill, but I don't agree with 40%, or I agree with these 100 things, but I find these 100 things to be wrong with it. How do you deal with that when you're talking about these huge financial areas?
Well, you start with your guiding principles. When I first ran for office 14 years ago, the national debt stood at about $12 trillion.
It seemed like a lot back then, right?
That was a lot back then, and now we're up to $35 trillion 14 years later. How did that happen?
Yeah.
There's a lack of will to get this job done. And so it was very frustrating. Very often there'd be a few dozen of us who would consistently vote no on these massive bills because we wanted to stop the hemorrhaging of the red ink. Really, it's going to take a different kind of leader for that to change. So you got a short term, what do you do now? And then longer term. Short term, look, you do that calculus. Is it going to be more helpful or more harmful on this particular bill? And you have to let people use their conscience on that. With respect to longer term, we need a leader, we need a president who, if Congress ever sends one of these types of bills, that president will veto this. I remember back in 1987 watching President Reagan during one of his States of the Union. He walks out to the podium in the House with a stack of paper that's probably 2 feet high, 1.5 feet high, and says, if Congress ever sends another one of these to the president, I will veto it. That was back in 1987, but it's unfortunately been business as usual for 3 decades, and this needs to stop, and it requires a leader in the White House who wants to make Congress great again and make Congress do its work in a more deliberate fashion.
Well, let's I'm going to avoid the politics questions in terms of going to there as we're talking about serving leadership, but let me go over to your family now. So you talked about the number of kids that you have. How did you emulate serving leadership within the family?
The dad is there to serve. He's there to serve his wife, his kids. So going to work, bringing home a paycheck, providing a home to live in, food to eat. and being there when the kids are in a rough time, where they're having a rough time, and making sure that the door is open so that they can come to you and talk. Doing family things together, family vacations, just being there. I remember hearing one time somebody said that quantity time is quality time. We always make this distinction between how much time you're spending with them. Well, as long as it's quality time. One of the challenges being in public office, frankly, was the amount of time I was away from the family. That was not optimal. There were a lot of things I wish I could have been at home for, birthdays or whatever, but I'm in Washington, D.C., trying to, put the country on a more secure footing, because I was viewing this as, look, my kids are going to go into this country in the 2020s and 2030s, and what kind of country is it going to be? Are they going to be saddled with all this debt that we're leaving our kids and grandkids? But you do what you can when you have a position like that. There's a lot of parents who have to travel for work. I have a friend who's an airline pilot. He's always going back and forth. That's a real challenge. Yeah. But for your family to know that you're doing it for them, that you love them, and there is a reason for this sacrifice.
And do you feel that now that your children are, obviously you have at least a number of them that are adults here because you have some grandchildren. Congratulations on that. Yeah. But talk about your children now that they're adults. Are you seeing the benefits of that serving leader emulation throughout their lifetimes?
Yeah, just being able to have kids that you're still in communication with. This is a very challenging time for families. I'm hearing stories all the time of families who there's cancellations within the family. The idea of being able to pick up the phone and talk with your kids, and your kids talking to each other, is so key. And to continue to foster that. Look, kids are different. Every kid is unique. It's one of the big surprises of parenting was how different each of the kids were.
Yeah, absolutely.
When number 2 came along, and boy, number 2 is really different from number 1. And then number 3 is really different from numbers 1 and 2. And number 4 is even more different. They're all unique individuals. They all have different gifts from God. There's going to be conflict between anybody. And so trying to keep everybody on the same page and understanding that you're going to have disagreements, but nothing makes me happier than when I get all my kids under one roof and we're visiting for the holidays.
I absolutely agree with that. Your community work, you mentioned some of the community work that you do. You mentioned that it was with the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church is quite a large bureaucracy. Now, obviously part of their deal is to follow Jesus Christ. Have you found that the serving leadership model has taken hold in there? Do you feel that that's being followed? And how do you follow it within that organization, within the volunteering that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a couple things besides the formal board work with the Dry Bones Ministries. We have a great ministry in downtown Pittsburgh where we feed the homeless every day at 10:30. And it's just a real privilege to be able to go there and either serve the coffee or serve the sandwiches. Or we also have a clothing boutique that people stand in line because they need particular things. And you're able to just engage with them. And it's more than just handing somebody a sandwich. It's more than just giving somebody a pair of jeans. You're talking with folks. You're asking them what their pressure points are. You're asking them, what's your story? Very often when you talk to homeless folks, and again, I've visited the Light of Life Rescue Mission here in Pittsburgh, which does great work for the homeless. You ask them, what's your story? Very often, just asking that question, the homeless will tell you, look, I think I'm invisible. People never say hello. And just having that small conversation with them lifts them up because we have to understand every human person, an encounter with every human person is an encounter with the living God, because every human person is made in the image and likeness of God. There is the imago Dei imprinted in everybody's heart, no matter what state they're in right now, because God created that person. God sustains that person. It's God's will that allows that person's diaphragm to move up and down and breathe. And as so long as that person's on this side and living, that person has promise, that person has hope. And so we have to engage with people that way.
It's absolutely beautiful, the way you said that. Talk about some of the other professionals that you work with. So if we can go back to Congress, we can go back to the Congress people that you worked with, but we can also talk about the accountants, attorneys, other people that you work through with the bank. Sometimes you're going to run into people that don't have that serving leader mentality. So one of the first things I want to know is, from the bank viewpoint, you're on this area. If you are looking at, or the bank is looking to bring in somebody that's an outside advisor to bring in for a certain period of time, are you looking for skill set first or the serving leader mentality first?
I think you have to have the skill set. Because if you can be a serving leader but not have the skill set, well, some things that particularly technical things are very difficult to get somebody up to speed on something if you need something done in a professional. And we're a regulated entity, so we have to make sure that everything that is being done by the book. So they have to have the skill set. And then yes, you do look for, how are they going to treat people? How are they going to be in this particular interaction between yourself and them even? You want somebody who's going to be open-minded, who's going to be a little bit of humility goes a long way. Somebody who's curious, somebody who may not understand what you want to do or where you're trying to go, but is willing to take the time to get your opinion, to get your point of view. And if there's something from a regulatory perspective or whatever that would cause somebody to say, let's take a look at that another way, you got to be open as well, because there's a lot of play in the joints, and to get the wisdom from other people who have that technical expertise. But you have to have a servant leader willing to point that out to you, and willing to have the courage to have some challenging conversations sometime.
Right. To jump back into the Congress, you had friends and colleagues that were congressmen with you. I assume that some of them were not serving leaders. Some of them were. So let's just talk about the ones that they had the skill set. They were obviously voted in by their constituents to come into there. How do you work with a person that doesn't have that serving leader mindset when you know you have to?
Yeah, well, I mean, do you necessarily have to work with all of them? No, you don't. I mean, The way it works is you have your committees. The way legislation moves, you have a bill that you want to introduce. It's very helpful when you get co-sponsors for the legislation. Look, you can have a conversation with anybody on the merits of the bill. Even somebody you might disagree with, or somebody you might not like their style at all. Maybe you don't think they do have a servant leader style, but that doesn't prevent you from having a conversation with that person. Because frankly, that person, they have their own perspective too. Look, I can't pretend to know the background of anybody I'm working with in Congress. We all come from very diverse backgrounds and hometowns and different life experiences. Sometimes you pick up an attitude, sometimes you don't. And I was very intentional about trying to reach both within my side of the aisle and even the other side of the aisle, looking for people that I could be talking with and having relationships with. And it's very interesting because I'd be talking to some of my other colleagues, and I'd mention that I knew somebody on the other side. They're like, "Oh, how'd you know that person?" And I talked to him.
Yeah.
I knew I was there for a season. I didn't know how long that would be, and I was going to try to get as much enjoyment out of it as possible. One of the things I like to do with another member from across the aisle, every May, we'd take a group of our colleagues over to Arlington Cemetery for some quiet reflection with those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Those were very meaningful times that you never really heard about because we didn't publicize it.
Right.
It was a great opportunity for us prior to Memorial Day to do a little bit of reflecting that we could take back to our districts. And when we're doing the Memorial Day events in our districts, it made those more meaningful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I got one more question for you. So there's a lot of young people out there. There's a lot of people that are growing businesses, and they want to talk to people who have serving leaders that have that serving leader mindset, or maybe they're just looking to you for advice. So how do you help mentor those up and coming leaders?
You grab them and you have a cup of coffee with them, and you start to talk to them. You start to listen. again, back to what I said earlier, every person has that stamp of Imago Dei within them. You don't know where they're going, where they're coming from. You do know that they are a child of God, even if that person does not realize it themselves. This is just a fact. God created us. You can't get away from that fact. He wants to live in relationship with us. You can't get away from that fact. We can run from that. We can pretend it's not there. But you look at Scripture. You look at Jesus first reading Scripture in a public setting in the synagogue in Nazareth, where he announces a year of favor from the Lord, coming to set the captives free, to heal the brokenhearted. That's the mission. And there's a lot of broken hearts out there right now, and there's a lot of folks who are captive to something. Yeah. And to have somebody who can just step back and have a conversation, and a lot of idealistic young people who want to make a difference, but they're kind of trying to figure it out, they certainly could use some counsel from some older folks who've been through some of the battles.
Even if they wear a hoodie. Hey, I want to thank you, Keith, so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for everybody else for joining us on Great Leaders Serve. Please help us get this valuable message out. So rate it, leave a review on your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, let's get Great Leaders Serve out to your friends and colleagues. Again, thank you, Keith, for being a part of this today, and we'll talk again.
For more information about the Center for Serving Leadership, visit our website at centerforservingleadership.com.